Hello and welcome. Today we bring you back Dr. Stephanie Westcott. Dr. Westcott, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much, Rahul. It's really great to be back with you talking about these things.
Absolutely. And then those who are watching and following our channel, you know that Dr. Westcott is giving us some insight. It's not it's just an education purposes, insight into invention and inventor's role and things like that. So today she'll be bringing some insights on the inventor as well as institution responsibilities and how these things work out. So Dr. Westcott, we are very glad you are here today. Our floor is yours.
Thanks so much. As soon as I can get the screen sharing to work. All right, so our topic for today, as we discussed, is inventors and institutions. And in the last episode, you'll recall that we talked very briefly about what is intellectual property. It's property of the mind, it's intangible. We talked about what patents are, the right to exclude others from making, using, selling, etc., for a limited amount of time in exchange for the public disclosure of your invention, giving your invention to the public, and talked briefly about the obtaining a patent, the process, the relationships involved, and it's that last portion that I want to spend a little more time on today. I want to hopefully clarify some things and expand a little bit what I talked about so that you, the inventor or the fledgling inventor, the young investigator, can approach this process with some more knowledge about your institution, your relationship with the institution, and feel empowered to approach your institution. So the big question, who is an inventor? And I really want to emphasize that an inventor is not the same as an author on a paper. You may have more authors on a paper than you would inventors. And that's because an inventor it has a legal meaning. It is a legal determination. An inventor contributes to the conception of the claimed invention. And I found a really sort of nice summary description here from the University of Toledo that I want to give you. The conception of the invention under patent law, defined as the information in the mind of the inventor of a definite and permanent idea of the complete and operative invention as it is to be applied in practice. So again, we're thinking of the idea. What does the invention comprise? Not just experiments that you have to do, figures that you have to make, but what is the thing you're making? How does it work? Or what is the process, whatever that might be. So you can see how just because someone is working on a project in a laboratory doesn't make that person an inventor. And I want to stress that just because you are aware of somebody's project or you've been sitting in a lab meeting talking about their experiments or you work in the lab somehow, that doesn't make you an inventor on their invention. Because if you didn't contribute to the conception of the invention, you are not an inventor. And there can be more than one inventor for an invention. It might be 2 people, it might be 3 people, it might be more than that who have contributed to that definite and permanent idea of the complete invention. So keep in mind there are distinctions, and just because you're participating in something doesn't make you an inventor. Now, thinking about the relationship between you, the potential inventor, and your place of work, your institution, which I will refer to as YI, the default position of US patent law, and again, I'm viewing this simply with respect to US law, is that the inventor owns the rights to his or her invention. So if you are tinkering in your garage and you invent a wrench that does something unique, you own that invention. And however, there is a big however, your institution is going to want the rights to what you invent in the course of your employment under the scope of your employment. So you will almost certainly end up assigning those rights to your institution. If they've written your contract properly, it will probably be in there. And that will include your institution will insist that you will have a duty to disclose to them inventions that you have contributed to in the course and scope of your employment, and that you will have a duty to assign to them the rights to those inventions. So what do? You say, okay, I've invented something. Well, you tell me I have this duty to disclose and to assign. How does that work? Well, you are going to be looking for something called an invention disclosure form. You might go by some other names, but I think that's the typical name. Who do you approach? You will very likely be going to the technology transfer office. And if you're in a small institution, they may not have a separate technology transfer office. Inventions may be handled through the legal department, but because technology transfer is now such a large and essential component of universities or institutions, activities, and intellectual property portfolios, you will probably be going to your tech transfer office. It might also be called the licensing office, intellectual property office, might have innovation in the name. There's a universe of names that people like to use. Now, a really easy way to find this is to go to your institution's homepage or internal homepage, look either for their legal department or for licensing office, technology transfer office. And they may have, maybe there's a drop-down menu with a handy link to an invention disclosure form, or they have a landing page with FAQs and frequently used forms, something like that. If you're having trouble finding it, you could just search for invention disclosure form. So this is going to be your entry point. This will be the start of your disclosure. And what is this going to involve? What is a university going to, or institution? I keep saying university, but there are more institutions than simply universities. So what is this going to involve? There's some variation, but a lot of these forms are going to look very similar. The institution is going to want you to describe the invention as you understand it. What are you trying to do? Don't just say, I made a widget. That doesn't really help. What have you invented? What is the problem you are trying to solve? How have you solved it? How does your invention specifically solve that problem or improve on a previous device or method, etc.? they may want a short summary and then may want a longer summary, or may want you to attach a manuscript or data, figures, whatever. You will need to identify the inventors, and they're very likely you will need to identify how they contributed individually. Your institution does need to be made aware of any public disclosures that you may be considering making in the future. If you screwed up and you disclosed this publicly and then you said, oh gosh, maybe that was an invention, please disclose to your your institution right away after you do that. Although everyone involved would prefer that your disclosure comes before your internal disclosure comes before your public disclosure, and there are very, very good reasons for that that I can get into at another time. What else might you need to include in on your invention disclosure form? Any art that you are aware of in the field. And again, you are probably an expert in your field, or you are becoming expert in your field. So you will be aware of at least some prior work in the field. So if you are, say, improving, you've figured out a way to improve a device, then you need to disclose, okay, what is the state of the art? What is known about the device that you are improving? Or if you have come up with a new method to test for something biological, what is the previous state of the art? What was the previous test? And why does, because you're trying to say, why does yours work better? So what is known in the art? And you do have down the road, you're going to have a legal duty to disclose all the art that you know of. There is, part of a patent filing is in IDS and in information disclosure, and where you're going to list whether it's patents you are aware of or publications you're aware of. You're also going to probably need to disclose whether there are inventors from other institutions. Science nowadays is highly collaborative, and it could be that your collaborator would also be considered an inventor because he or she contributed to the conception of the idea. Did you use government funding? Did you use private funding? Did you use institutional funding? The money trails need to be followed. Also, you may need to disclose, and even if it's not on the information disclosure sheet, you do need to be aware of whether you've been using materials from a company or from another institution as part of your invention. And I'm going to attempt some screen sharing to show a sample disclosure. All right, so to obtain this document, I just did a quick Google search for invention disclosure form, and thank you to UC Berkeley. Yours is the first that came up. So theirs is 13 pages. They're not all quite this long, I believe, but here's an example of an invention disclosure form that is fairly comprehensive. Again, you'll see Office of Technology Licensing. That is UC Berkeley's tech transfer office. So that gives you an idea of what name you might be looking for at your particular institution. They would like a title of an invention. That's not going to be something official written in stone. It just, we need a name. A summary of the invention. Again, they very nicely state right here, novel features and benefits are important to highlight. So keep that in mind. So there's a summary they're asking for and a detailed description. Again, I'm really liking this form because they're adding explanations as to why they're asking for this information. So this might be a good guide for you to use, even if your institution's form is not as detailed. So they're looking for, in this detailed description, the motivation for the invention, such as we said, the problem it solves or the opportunities it addresses, advantages and disadvantages in comparison to current and potential alternatives. And they're asking for drawings, schematics, figures, and again, references to other relevant art. Berkeley is asking their inventors to think about how might this invention be commercialized. And I love how they say include speculative uses. This information is, again, it's not definitive, but they're clearly trying to get their inventors to think, not just, oh, I made a really cool thing, or this technology is really helpful in my area, but think about how can it be used in the future down the road. And I think that's a great thing for an institution to be encouraging inventors to think commercially, because tech transfer, a very important reason for having tech transfer is that it helps move inventions from an institutional setting to commercial partnerships. And commercialization is important. And it means revenue coming into an institution that supports all kinds of things, but it also means a path forward with partners who are better suited to bring things to the world. So this is a two-way street. Be thinking, have that in mind when you're dealing with your institution, that this is a two-way street, and that's the perspective that they're coming from. Now, not everyone is going to ask you things like, well, who do you think would be interested in this? But if you're a savvy inventor, then maybe you would have your ear to the ground. Again, funding information, these things need to know. Timeline information. When did you come up with these things? This may not be quite as important now with the changes in US law that happened a few years ago, but it's still helpful to know, still important to know. Any disclosures, any planned disclosures, and then listing the inventors, they need your contact information, all that kind of thing. And then there's just a lot of room for additional inventors. But you can see my point here is that some institutions are going to ask for fairly detailed information. And again, I think this is a pretty good example. But you can see how it wasn't too hard to find this form. So you shouldn't feel daunted trying to find that information from your institution. And I'm going to try to get back to my slides here. So now look at an invention disclosure form. And we will say, for the sake of argument, that you have turned in your form to your tech transfer office and your invention's journey has begun, if you will, and you've done it properly. You're doing that before your meeting or before your poster presentation or whatever that might be. What's happening next to your disclosure as it's working its way through the institutional system? You're getting on with your work, and other people are now going to get on with theirs. So it is going to be reviewed and assessed. And again, as I was talking about, it will be reviewed and assessed from a perspective that may be slightly different than yours. The tech transfer office or legal office, who's ever reading this, is going to be looking for what state of readiness is characterizes your invention. In other words, is this just an idea you've had, you actually haven't done much work on it, but you're really excited about it and you want to start pursuing it, and you say like, okay, this is an invention, I think this could be really cool, I'm going to disclose and then start my work. So that's at it's not immediately commercializable, so it's in process. Your folks may be very happy that you've disclosed early, and they can, stay in the loop with you as things progress. But they're not, they may not be thinking immediately like, oh, okay, I can go talk to X company that I know might be interested, because you're just getting started. Whereas if you've done a lot of work on something and you're like, yeah, I've got a working sample test, or I've got some working prototypes that I'd like to demo, I think X, Y, and Z companies might be really interested in this. That's much further along. The tech transfer review will also include an evaluation of the patentability. And that's where all that additional information that you're providing with the disclosure form comes in handy. So for instance, they may be sitting around the table reviewing this week's disclosures, and they may be looking at it from the perspective of, if I sit down and in 3 minutes I do Google search, can I find something that is really similar to yours? If I can, then it doesn't necessarily knock your invention out, but it indicates that maybe this is a crowded space that lots of people are working in, and maybe the scope that you could get on a patent might be more narrow. Nothing wrong with that. That's reality for a lot of people. For a lot of work, you might just be working in a crowded space. Or they might, maybe if I take that 2 minutes, 3 minutes to Google, maybe I come up with something kind of similar to yours and something kind of similar to yours in a different way, and say, okay, if I put that together, put those two things together, is an examiner gonna say, oh, well, combining those two things makes it obvious to do what you've done. Again, that's not necessarily going to knock your invention out, but it's something that they may come back to you and say, we're going to have to, it's going to require a little bit of strategy to figure out how we're going to define this invention. And as I said already, your institution is going to be reviewing from a commercial perspective. Is your invention something that they think they can talk to their commercial partners about, whether it's a company they've worked with before, or whether they are aware because they have their ear to the ground that, oh, I know, so-and-so is really interested in entering this space, and oh, look, your invention fits really nicely with what we know their interests are. We think we could talk to them and see if they would be interested in licensing. So your institution is part of what they're doing is cultivating those relationships, and for the future, not just the present. So they're going to be thinking from that commercial perspective. Some institutions will do spin-off companies, and they will have their own policies and procedures, sources of funding, different agreements that you might enter into to do that. But while that's really exciting, a lot of people are doing that. Keep in mind that everything costs money, and sometimes resources are limited, or maybe it's a physical incubator space, maybe that's limited. So while you might be super excited about a spinoff, just be aware that your institution, it may be a process to do that, or maybe you're going to need a commercial partner or something like that. So it's exciting, but it might not be something that happens immediately. or for various reasons, it may not be the right decision for you and your invention. And one thing I didn't write down here, but I think is important to keep in mind is, so suppose that you go through the review process, your disclosure goes through this review process, and your institution says, you know what, we just don't see the potential in this. Or we don't think we have anybody we can partner with right now. And you say, but I really love this. I think this is really cool. There is the possibility that you could, if you say, I want to pursue it, then your institution can return your rights to you, assign your rights back to you. And then, you are the owner, you can pursue it with your own time, your own money. Now keep in mind, just because you think something is really cool doesn't mean it's going to be commercially viable, or you may have a very small market. So listen to what people are telling you. I won't say let them crush your dreams, but just be aware that, these assessments are not made lightly. However, I can think of at least one example of a researcher who believed in his idea and his institution did not. He said, you know what, I'm going to do it myself. He pursued it himself, and it is now a viable company. So those things do happen. Just be aware that there are costs and benefits. And finally, if Rahul doesn't mind, I'm going to get on my soapbox for just a minute. I believe that one of your institution's duties to you is to inform you. And I get that institutions are very, very busy. Tech transfer offices are very busy places. Legal offices are very busy places. But your understanding of what it means to be an inventor, how your institution's processes work, what their policies are, those are really important. And it is essential for you as a young investigator early in your career, or wherever you might be, to not feel overwhelmed, to feel empowered that you may be an inventor, that you can participate in this process. And so, standing on my soapbox, I will say, talk to your institution. We've spent a few minutes talking in generalities here, but spending time talking to people where you are can give you a very definite idea of how things work at your particular institution, and can help build relationships going forwards. Maybe you are not an inventor right now, maybe you will be in 3 years. But knowledge now will empower you later. So whether that's asking for a short meeting, asking for someone to come talk to your department or your graduate program or your lab, or getting a group of interested early career investigators together to learn about these things, look for ways to build those relationships so that you have the knowledge and the confidence to address these things as they may come up in your career. The end.